What if the greatest lie ever sold to humanity is the God you pray to? 2,000 years ago, 6 radioactive words shattered the religious empire. Heaven isn't a post-mortem reward, and you are not a fragile biological accident. The terrifying truth hiding inside you will completely annihilate your reality. Imagine standing on the precipice of a moment that completely shatters the foundation of reality as you know it. For 2 millennia, we have been fed a heavily diluted, securely packaged version of the most dangerous, earth-shattering event in human history. We are taught to visualize a peaceful teacher sharing gentle metaphors, but the truth is raw, violent, and utterly terrifying to those in power. A man stood in the very epicenter of religious authority and uttered 6 words that were so radioactive, so fundamentally catastrophic to the establishment of his time, that the immediate response was an impromptu public execution. The men holding the absolute monopoly on divinity didn't want to debate him. They wanted to violently erase him from the face of the earth before his words could infect the minds of the masses. At Vuong Yanquank 07 warmly welcomes you to this journey into the profound. If you are ready to uncover the unfiltered truths that the establishment has desperately tried to bury, please hit that subscribe button right now to support the channel and give us the driving force to keep bringing you these deep, mind-bending revelations. Now, let us step back into the biting cold of a first-century winter. It is the Feast of Dedication. Visualize the sprawling, architectural dominance of the Portico of Solomon inside the Second Temple. The air is suffocatingly tense, heavy with the silent panic of men who feel their centuries-old grip on power slipping. Jesus is pacing through the colonnade, completely encircled by the religious elite, the Pharisees, the scribes, the absolute gatekeepers of the divine VIP lounge. They back him into a corner, demanding a definitive answer, desperate for a reason to finally neutralize the existential threat he poses. And right there, staring directly into the eyes of the corporate board of ancient religion, Jesus drops. The mother of all paradigm shifts. I and the Father are one. Modern theologians and soft-spoken Sunday school teachers have spent centuries desperately trying to walk back the sheer terror of this moment. They sell you what I call the safe excuse. They try to convince you that Jesus simply meant he was strictly on the same page as God, like a dutiful middle manager perfectly executing the CEO's business plan. They claim it was just a poetic declaration of ultimate moral obedience. But let me be brutally honest with you. That interpretation is a complete and utter scam. If you look at the raw historical data, the religious market was already flooded with heavy-hitting prophets. Men like Moses, Isaiah, and Elijah stood before kings and empires declaring they were the faithful messengers of the Most High. They literally claimed to be executing the absolute will of the big boss. And nobody ever picked up a jagged piece of masonry to cave their skulls in just for claiming to be compliant employees. Being a devoted vessel was the standard, culturally accepted job description. The murderous reaction of the Pharisees that day proves that they heard something entirely different, something infinitely more lethal. Jesus wasn't claiming to be a mere messenger. He was claiming to bypass their entire agonizingly constructed communication system. The heavy stones gripped in the shaking hands of those religious leaders are the ultimate historical proof that they recognized a systemic, terminal threat. They knew he was fundamentally annihilating their dualistic worldview. He wasn't telling them he worked for the Creator. He was exposing that the barrier between the human and the divine was a fabricated illusion. He was initiating an awakening so intensely dangerous it almost got the entire movement flatlined right there on the cold, pristine temple floor. To understand why those heavy stones were raised in trembling anger, we must first dismantle the greatest caricature ever sold to humanity, the identity of the very God Jesus was claiming unity with. For centuries, the institutional religious machine has successfully conditioned us to envision the Father as a supreme, separated monarch sitting on a celestial throne somewhere just beyond the clouds. We have been spoon-fed the image of a transactional deity, a cosmic judge who demands appeasement, hands down rigid laws, and watches our every move from a terrifying, unbridgeable distance. But when Jesus stood in that temple and claimed absolute oneness, he was completely obliterating this dualistic mythology. He was not talking about a sovereign being residing out there in the sky. He was pointing to the absolute, unmanifested source of all existence. He was speaking of universal consciousness itself, the infinite ground of being from which every solitary form in the universe dynamically arises. The men in embroidered robes that day recognized the radically subversive nature of his words, because if God is not a distant dictator, but rather the underlying fabric of reality, then the middlemen are instantly rendered obsolete. You do not need a high priest, a towering temple, or a burning sacrifice to access your own essence. You do not need religious permission to breathe the spiritual air that already fills your lungs. Jesus was effectively democratizing the divine, violently tearing down the velvet ropes of the sacred and declaring that the ultimate reality flows directly through the mundane veins of the human experience. This was not just a theological disagreement. It was an economic and political catastrophe for the temple elites. They knew that if the bruised and battered masses ever woke up and realized that the infinite source of all power was residing quietly within their own consciousness, the entire ancient empire of fear, guilt, and religious taxation would collapse overnight into dust. By aligning himself with the Father, Jesus was stripping away the anthropomorphic, human-like mask of God to reveal a truth so vast, so staggeringly infinite, that it simply could not be contained within the rigid, claustrophobic walls of orthodox dogma. He was looking at a world trapped in a cage of separation and handing them the key to universal integration, teaching that the Creator and the creation are locked in an inseparable, eternal dance. Yet, this radical redefinition of the divine requires a terrifying sacrifice that goes far beyond abandoning our comfortable childhood beliefs. It demands the utter, agonizing annihilation of who you think you are. When we look at the cross, we are historically conditioned to see a brutal Roman execution apparatus, a physical punishment endured by one man to balance a cosmic ledger of sin. But beneath the blood and the wood lies a much deeper, far more psychologically devastating reality. The true crucifixion did not begin on Golgotha. It began the moment a human mind fully surrendered its illusion of separateness. To say, "I and the Father are one," is to sign the death warrant of the ego. It is the ultimate realization that the small, fearful, grasping I, the identity built on social standing, historical grievances, and personal desires, is a phantom. Jesus was demonstrating the absolute death of the psychological self. You cannot merge with the infinite while still fiercely clinging to your finite, constructed identity. The religious leaders were terrified because they saw a man who had completely emptied himself of personal ambition, a man who had nothing left to lose, making him impossible to control. When you no longer fear death, when you no longer desperately crave the validation of society, the establishment loses all leverage over you. The ego is a survival mechanism, a tightly wound knot of anxiety that constantly whispers we are isolated fragments fighting against a hostile universe. Jesus' realization of oneness cut right through that knot. He was showing humanity that the only way to experience eternal life is to willingly let the false self die before your physical body does. This is the mystical death that terrifies us the most. We instinctively fight tooth and nail to protect our narratives, our labels, and our fragile pride. But the profound message echoing from the first century is that true freedom is found only in surrender. It is the terrifying, exhilarating free fall of letting go of the edge, trusting that when the isolated self shatters, what remains is the unbroken, luminous presence of the divine. When the separate self finally dies and that boundary is erased, the rigid concepts of time and space collapse, exposing the ultimate lie we have been told about our ultimate destination. For generations, we have been aggressively sold the concept of heaven as a post-mortem real estate transaction. We are taught to view salvation as a futuristic waiting game. Endure the suffering of this brutal physical realm, follow the institutional rules, and eventually, after your heart stops beating, you will be rewarded with a golden paradise. This is the ultimate pacifier, designed to keep people docile, compliant, and constantly looking away from the power of the present moment. But Jesus shattered this timeline completely. He bluntly declared that the kingdom of heaven is not a geographical location, nor is it a future event arriving on a cloud. It is completely, undeniably within you. It is at hand. It is here, right now, vibrating beneath the surface of the ordinary. By placing the kingdom within the human interior, he shifted the entire focus of spirituality from an external rescue mission to an internal awakening. Heaven is a shift in consciousness. It is the profound realization of your fundamental unity with everything around you. When you look deeply into the eyes of a stranger, when you feel the wind against your face, when you sit in absolute, unadulterated stillness, you are standing in the very center of the kingdom. The religious authorities despise this teaching because you cannot sell tickets to a destination that people already inhabit. You cannot control a population that finds absolute divine fulfillment in the quietness of their own immediate reality. The kingdom is simply reality perceived without the distorting lens of the frightened ego. It is the world seen through the eyes of pure awareness. By tearing heaven out of the future and planting it firmly in the now, Jesus gave humanity the ultimate tool of empowerment. The realization that the sacred is not waiting for us at the end of our lives, but is breathing through us in this exact, unrepeatable second. This monumental revelation was never meant to be securely entombed in the dust of antiquity. It is a living, breathing challenge echoing directly into the core of your existence right now. We sit here today, 2,000 years later, still largely chained to the same anxieties, the same feelings of deep isolation, and the same desperate searching that plagued the people of the ancient world. We are still looking outward for saviors, waiting for politicians, gurus, or technological advancements to deliver us from our internal suffering. But the story of the man in the temple is not a historical documentary. It is a profound mirror held up to your own face. The words, "I and the Father are one," are not an exclusive, copyrighted claim belonging to a singular historical figure. They are the ultimate blueprint for human evolution. They are an invitation to wake up from the collective amnesia that has convinced you that you are just a fragile biological accident spinning on a rock in a cold universe. You are being called to step onto that cold temple floor in your own life and confront the authorities of your own mind, the doubts, the conditioning, the societal rules that tell you to play small and stay separated. This is the great awakening of our time. It is the realization that the very consciousness reading these words, the awareness looking out through your eyes, is the exact same consciousness that birthed the stars. You are the universe waking up to itself, experiencing the magnificent, heartbreaking beauty of life through a unique human lens. The time for playing safe, for hiding behind diluted metaphors and secondhand spirituality, is over. The establishment of fear is crumbling, and the dawn of a non-dual reality is breaking through the cracks. It requires immense courage to look within and embrace the boundless power of your true nature. It requires the bravery to let the old self die so that the infinite can live through you. As we stand at the precipice of this new era of human consciousness, the only question that remains is whether you will pick up the stones of judgment and fear, or whether you will drop them, open your hands, and finally realize that you have always been home. Ultimately, the radical message echoing from the ancient temple to our modern lives is one of profound liberation through unity. The revolutionary claim of oneness with the divine was never meant to establish a new religion of rigid rules, but to dismantle the very illusions that keep us imprisoned in fear, separation, and subservience. By exposing the traditional, distant sky god as a mechanism of control, we are invited to recognize the ultimate reality, that the divine is the fundamental fabric of our own consciousness. This journey, however, requires the ultimate surrender. It demands the crucifixion of our fragile, constructed egos, letting go of our desperate need for societal validation, historical grievances, and the illusion of isolation. When we willingly allow this false self to die, we realize that heaven is not a distant, post-mortem reward, but a profound shift in present awareness. We are not fragile biological accidents waiting to be rescued by an external savior. We are the universe itself, waking up to its own infinite potential. The true essence of this spiritual awakening is realizing that the sacred breath of existence flows directly through our mundane, everyday experiences. We are called to drop the heavy stones of judgment, fear, and religious dogma, and embrace the staggering truth that we have never actually been separate from the source. This is the ultimate blueprint for human evolution, a radical transition from seeking the divine outwardly to realizing it inwardly, stepping fully into the unshakable peace, power, and limitless integration of the present moment. The ultimate truth is that separation is an illusion. You are not a disconnected fragment fighting against a hostile world, nor is the divine a distant authority figure waiting to judge you. The profound lesson is that the kingdom of heaven is not a future destination to earn. It is a present state of awakened consciousness. True spiritual liberation comes only through the surrender of the ego, letting go of the manufactured identity built on fear, pride, and external validation, to reveal the unbroken, infinite presence already residing quietly within you. Embrace the present. Stop treating today as merely a stressful stepping stone to a better tomorrow. Spend a few minutes each day in complete stillness, focusing entirely on your breath and the immediate sensory experience of the present moment. Recognize that this exact second is where the sacred lies. Observe your ego. When you feel angry, defensive, or anxious, recognize that this is just the false self trying to protect its fragile identity. Step back and observe these feelings as a witness without judgment, rather than letting them control your reactions. See the unity in others. Look deeply into the people around you. Remind yourself that the exact same consciousness looking out through your eyes is looking back at you through theirs. Treat every ordinary interaction as a profound encounter with the divine. What is one simple, everyday activity where you feel completely at peace and truly connected to the present moment? Please take a moment to share your perspective in the comments below so we can all learn and draw inspiration from each other's experiences. If this message resonated with you, please hit the subscribe button to support the channel. Your encouragement gives us the motivation to continue creating deep, thought-provoking content for our next video.